Lady Jane Grey wasn't executed for rebellion. She was executed because a signature existed, and Tudor law doesn't forgive ink. It is February 12th, 1554. Tower Green is silent. A 17-year-old girl kneels at the block. To understand why she had to die, you have to stop thinking of her as a girl and start thinking of her as a document. In a kingdom obsessed with succession and treason, she was a death warrant waiting for a signature. Most history books paint her as a helpless victim of her father's ambition, a tragic footnote in the Tudor story. But here at Thronebound Histories, we look for the truth written in the cold, calculated letters of foreign spies, the scratch of a quill on parchment, and the brutal math of Tudor law. To the world in 1553, Jane wasn't a person. She was a legal heartbeat that threatened the very foundation of the throne. And in a court of wolves, a heartbeat is just a target. Favor is a ghost in the tower, and the law is a predator that never sleeps, especially when a royal signature already exists. November 13th, 1553. The air in London is thick with the scent of river mud and coal smoke. Jane is marched through the grey streets to the Guildhall. She is 17 years old, a scholar who would rather be lost in her books than lost in a palace. Behind her walks the gentleman jailer, carrying the processional axe. On the walk to the trial, the blade is turned away from her, the traditional signal that the prisoner is not yet condemned, but the eyes of the crowd tell a different story. She wasn't charged with being a pawn. She was charged with high treason. Primary sources, the official records of the Crown, are lethal in their clarity. By signing her name as Jane the Queen on royal proclamations, she had committed a crime that couldn't be unwritten. Jane didn't fight. She pleaded guilty because Tudor law offered no defense once a royal proclamation bore her name. She was a Tudor by blood. She knew that in this room there was no room for mercy. The sentence was set, to be burned alive or beheaded at the Queen's pleasure, but the blade stayed dry. Mary I wanted mercy. Spain wanted a sacrifice. Mary didn't want Jane's blood on her hands. In private, she called Jane cousin and resisted her counsel's demands for an execution date for over 6 months. But Mary wanted something else more than a clean conscience. She wanted Philip of Spain. Enter Simon Reynard, the Spanish ambassador. His secret dispatches reveal the psychological warfare he waged on the Queen. He was blunt, telling Mary that the Spanish prince would never set foot in England so long as a rival claimant still breathed. Jane's death was the dowry for Mary's marriage. Mary was caught between blood and a throne. The blade that killed Jane was sharpened long before the scaffold by her father's hand, signing her name into danger once more. January 1554. Thomas Wyatt the Younger raises a rebellion to stop the Spanish wedding, but the fatal blow to Jane came from the Duke of Suffolk, her own father. He once again proclaimed Jane's title, and in doing so, he ended her life. This is the throne-bound reality. Mary could forgive one rebellion, but she couldn't ignore a second. Her counsel cornered her with the cold fact that as long as the Lady Jane lived, there would be no peace. Mary finally signed the warrant in a state of deep, sorrowful resignation. She was killing the girl to save the Queen. The morning of February 12th was a parade of ghosts. Before Jane could reach her own scaffold, she had to endure one final cruelty. She stood at her window in the tower,
and watched her husband, Guilford Dudley, being led to the public block on Tower Hill. She didn't cry out. She waited. Minutes later, she watched as his headless body was carted back through the gates in a wooden handcart, the straw soaked in his blood. The man she had been forced to marry was now reduced to velvet, blood, and what remained of a man. Jane looked at the cart, whispered his name, and turned to face her own headsman. If she had any hope left, it died in that handcart. The time for politics was over. The time for the headsman had begun. February 12th, 1554. Tower Green is silent now, not with anticipation, but with acceptance. Jane steps onto the scaffold and delivers her final speech, recorded by those standing at the foot of the platform. She said, "Good people, I have come hither to die, and by a law I am condemned to the same. The fact, indeed, against the Queen's Highness was unlawful, and the consenting thereto by me, but touching the procurement and desire thereof by me or on my behalf, I wash my hands thereof in innocency, before God and the face of you, good Christian people, this day." She began to prepare. She gave her gloves to her maid, and tied a white cloth around her own eyes, blindfolding herself for the end. But as the world went black, the composure broke. Jane reached out for the block, but her hands met only empty air. She panicked. In her place was a terrified girl reaching into the void. Her voice echoed across the green. "What shall I do? Where is it?" A bystander had to step forward and guide her hands down to the wood. She laid her head in the notch and whispered, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." The axe fell once. Mary stayed in her palace that day, reportedly consumed by grief. She granted Jane a private execution inside the tower walls, a final silent acknowledgement of their shared blood. Jane Grey wasn't a martyr, and she wasn't a hero. She was a casualty of the machinery of state. In the cold math of 1554, a living Jane meant a dying kingdom. Was Mary a monster, or was she simply doing what the Tudor crown demanded to survive? Tell us what you think in the comments. This is Thronebound Histories, stories from the edge of the blade.